With a little bit of ado, a little bit more of ado, and without further ado, we have Viz up on stage speaking on how not to Infosec, so please welcome him to the stage.
What could possibly go wrong, right? So, this is me. Most of you guys know me already. We can skip this stuff. This is how to stalk me if you really feel like stalking me. I'm only interesting sometimes very, very late at night. Basically, this talk, to go back here, is everybody's been to cons and everybody's been to talks, and in most cases those talks are topics like, look at this awesome hack that I did, or look at this thing that made me successful, or look at this amazing thing that I should get credit for, or, you know, that's your typical, like, I deserve a gold star and here's why. The type of talks that you never ever see at cons are like, holy fuck, I wrecked it, the building burned down, oh my god, don't be me. Because those talks tend not to be very popular and people don't like talking about their own mistakes. And this is one of those. This is mistakes I have made, mistakes I've watched people make, mistakes I've seen other people make, mistakes that my clients have made, mistakes that their clients have made, and just a giant, this is basically a fail talk. It's a big talk about failure and like how things broke and what not to do. So this is how to stalk me if you're really interested still. So TLDR, everyone faces problems, right? So anybody, God, what was it, DEF CON 15? I mean, DEF CON 15 people. Adam Savage was there, if you guys remember. And he did this really amazing talk where he talked about how failure made him the man he was today. And he did this amazing talk that described the things that he did that broke and how they went wrong and how he fixed the problems after things went wrong. And he said, basically, learn from your mistakes quickly and move on. Like, fix it fast and go. It's kind of like the, you know, break fix kind of thing, or, you know, safety third, you know, read the directions only after you're bleeding, that kind of thing. Right? Apropos for Mythbusters. But I sort of took that presentation to heart and said, I don't think anything like this exists for Infosec. So I did my best to try and put together a talk that describes how to fuck it up, or what not to do to fuck it up specifically, as opposed to like neat things you can do to win or get money or what have you. And I was inspired by this, which is really interesting. This is a minesweeper that's used in Kabul. It's basically bamboo and a bunch of plastic that some dude whipped together, and it's so light the wind blows it around. And as the wind blows it around in the fields of Kabul, it lands on landmines and blows them up, which means that if you live in Kabul and you want to go play in the desert for some reason, you can fear less about getting blown up because there are several of these things rolling around, and they're super easy to repair because when a mine goes off, it only takes off one of those little legs. So pretty cool stuff, right? So I figured, well, that's pretty apropos. A lot of people change jobs, a lot of people move around, especially people in the service industry go and they work for a lot of different clients. And I said, this is kind of like us if we actually were to take notes on like how we fucked it up or how we watched other people fuck it up. So let me be your minesweeper for today, right? So this slide used to be a story I told about a bunch of different people that would walk into a bar and then a pen tester would shout at them. But instead of telling that story, because it does eat quite a bit of time, I'll just say overclassification is kind of a shitty thing to do and it hurts everybody. And to give you an example, you'll have like law enforcement types or military types or government types tell you that things are classified, like what email provider they use or what email services they use. If you exchange email with them on a variety of different mailing lists, their mail server tells you exactly what it is. Like you could look at the mail headers and say this is Exchange or Outlook. So pretending that there are secrets when they're not secret. Like if I can look at the mail headers of the mail message you just sent me and tell that you're running Outlook, it's not fucking classified. I don't care what you say. Like, I'm sorry, you're just being an idiot. Like, it's cool that you have secrets, but nobody gives a fuck. So, right? So to begin, we'll talk about a whole bunch of very large public failures. The intention here is I'm going to go through a bunch of different sort of verticals. So we'll have fails from the business side, fails from sysadmins, fails from network admins, fails from pen testers, fails from clients. Like it's a whole gamut. So it's not just me as an attacker on stage complaining about people doing things wrong. It's everything, like end to end. Well, that's the intention anyway. So these are some of the big ones just in the last few years. This is a colorful chart that I stole. I don't remember, probably February, I think. I originally built this deck for DEF CON, so I built this deck like January or December. And this was an old graph then, because even then, like I don't think Sony Pictures is on here. And I don't think Ashley Madison is on here. Home Depot and Target are, but these are just the ones we know about, right? So these are just the ones where the corporate executives decided it would be a good idea to talk to the press about it, or if things got leaked somehow, or if the attackers publish shit on Pastebin or what have you. So these are just the ones we know about, and I mean, they do a good job of making the chart look really cluttered and full of stuff. So it's like, oh my God, look how many of these are, and I'm sure that they did that on purpose from a design perspective. But I would wager that for every one of these entries on this chart, there's probably a dozen that we don't know about yet because the attackers haven't been caught, right? So also OPM isn't on here, and OPM would probably encompass like even a huger blob on this chart, right? So I'd like you to consider the following. Clearly, what we've been doing as an industry up until now isn't as effective as it could be. We're getting better, but we're still hampered by a variety of different wet blankets. The following is a compendium of examples of when something was done that dramatically and negatively affected security, and these examples will come from a variety of perspectives. So we'll start with engineering fails. So lack of foresight, deliberate misconduct, charlatanism, when lawyers attack, reasons outside of security for why security wasn't a consideration. There are many, sadly, and I couldn't afford to issue everybody in the audience a helmet, but I did ask some of you to bring them, so I hope you brought them. So we'll start with deliberate SSL man in the middle for generally the purposes of advertising or collecting information on your customers. So if your organization decides to do like SSL man in the middle on your customers or on like laptops or what have you, and it's for advertising or marketing or collecting user data for some reason, as the security person in the room, presuming that you are the security person in the room and you're in those conversations with management, that even if they're open about like, hey, we're gonna SSL everybody, what do you guys think of that? It's pretty much your job to shoot a flare in the air and say, this is a really, really bad idea, because if we get caught, like, it's gonna be Superfish all over again. It's sort of, you have to take that torch up as a security person and say, like, this is really bad, this is going to have really dramatic PR and technical implications, because I'm sure that the geniuses at Superfish didn't consider for a moment that when they made a fake SSL CA, that bad guys would steal that CA and use it for legit bad guy stuff. Like, it never dawned on them that people could like extract their evil that they made for the purposes of making money and use evil for like legit evil, like wire fraud. Like, they just didn't dawn on them, I guess. So lesson number one, don't invade people's privacy for financial gain. Stop it if you can, if you have the ability to. If you can't stop it, make it very clear that what people are doing is bad news. And don't be surprised if your tech gets hijacked and used in a very evil way because you didn't consider that you were enabling attackers to do evil stuff with your evil tech. Rootkits. I mean, remember, everybody should remember that Sony DRM rootkit, right? You just want to listen to your new music CD, you pop your CD in your Windows 98 laptop or whatever it was at the time, and boom, you're infected with a virus. And that virus is actually Sony, because they want to keep track of what you're doing with the music they just sold you. You know, they're not happy that you just paid $18 for the CD. They also want to know what you do with that music after you've bought it from them, right? So they had that genius idea of installing malware on clients' machines after people bought audio CDs, and then it went to court and it got really ugly. Same sort of deal if you're sat in a meeting and somebody suggests effectively installing malware on customers' private computers for the purposes of like DRM or copy protection. Same sort of deal. It's your job as a security person in the room to stand up and say, this is a really fucking bad idea. Look what happened to Sony. We should learn from our mistakes and we should not do this. And you should, again, do everything in your power to, as the lawyers like to put it, let's not do anything that would get us sued. So lesson number two, just don't install malware on your customers' machines. So watching users type on their mobile devices and eavesdropping on keystrokes is not cool, pretty much no matter how you slice it. I mean, unless you're a red team guy or girl hired specifically to do that job. Like, if your job is to break into stuff and log keystrokes, okay, cool. But if you're selling something, like maybe you're Verizon, and you partner with a company, maybe somebody like Carrier IQ, and they start keylogging everything that people do on Verizon phones. Kind of shady, not very cool. Like, why does Carrier IQ need all your keystrokes even when your phone's offline? Kind of bizarre. A while back this happened, and it was almost the same sort of deal that the Lenovo's experienced with Superfish, where you know, people's SSL traffic was being compromised for the purpose of injecting advertising and doing analysis on what people were doing over SSL. So in this case, people figured out carrier IQ was the culprit, and then they did some research into carrier IQ and found out that carrier IQ was funded by basically a CIA front. So kind of shady. No idea why the CIA was trying to surveil everybody on Verizon. Kind of bizarre. Okay, it was a bad idea. I don't know if carrier IQ got squashed because of it, but they got a lot of really, really bad press. So lesson number 3, don't keylog your customers. If they find out, you're going to have a very, very bad time. So routinely, people that work in offices write passwords down on sticky notes, right? This is not a surprise to anybody. Sometimes it's on whiteboards, maybe it's a Wi-Fi password or other things like that. A thing to consider is that your inbox, which a lot of people think, oh, my inbox is totally private. Well, probably not if I have the creds to it. When I do my security assessments, one of the first things I go for is people's inboxes, and you sort by attachments, and you look for the oldest thing, because the oldest stuff in your inbox at work is probably the, hey HR, how do I do this? Or hey IT, how do I do that? And they tell you, here's the URL for the wiki, and here's your default creds, which you'll never change. And your new password is Monday 5, which you'll change to Monday 6 in 90 days when the password policy forces you to change your password. And people don't stop. Almost every organization I've done a pen test for that's a Windows-based organization, this is common. Probably 25% of the employees do this sort of stuff. So same sort of deal. This is I would argue a quasi-solvable problem. You could just go download CrackStation, which is an 18 gig text file full of passwords, and put that in Active Directory as a check to say, if the password that somebody wants to use is in CrackStation, don't fucking let them. It's a known password, right? And the idea that passwords, that's a whole other topic. There could be a whole different talk just on passwords alone. But in this particular topic, I'm talking about where passwords are stored. One really fun story here is that I did an assessment for an organization where several of the people in technology really like to use Microsoft OneNote, which, all right, cool, I'm an Evernote guy myself, but whatever, I don't judge. So this guy, and I can't fathom why he did it this way. I didn't bother asking, maybe I should have. To my knowledge, OneNote is supposed to phone home and, like Evernote, store your stuff in a cloud somewhere on somebody else's computer, because that's totally rad. So this dude was migrating from laptop A to laptop B. So what he did was, and I don't get it, he zipped up all of his OneNotes and emailed them to himself so that on his new laptop he could just unzip them and drag and drop them into OneNote and back up his OneNotes, which was great for me because I found that zip file when I looted his inbox, and I had all of his creds, or not just his creds, but it was all the creds to the infrastructure, all the administrator passwords, all the Cisco root passwords, or the Cisco enable passwords, everything. The whole 80% of all the passwords for the entire organization was in this fucking text file that he kept in OneNote that he emailed to himself. So I'm slapping my forehead going the passwords in the text file were a little bit more complex than his password, which was very, very silly. But TLDR for this particular lesson number 4, treat passwords like dick pics. Don't leave them lying around for people to find. Presume people will be looking for them, and when they're found, you're going to get really embarrassed and you're going to have a bad time. So just don't leave clear text passwords just fucking lying around. Just don't. It's so bad. So almost every company I've done a red team engagement for, as well as Sony in the news, has recently had a similar problem. And this is a tough one. I'll have to say this is a tall order. I've been in 2 or 3 organizations now where I pitch this to people and they're like, oh, and they just wince. A giant 4 or 12 terabyte storage array somewhere in the organization that's just a giant fucking ocean of file shares. Anybody can read write, there's no permissions, there's no separate section for HR or finance or the board or anything like that. It's just one giant SMB file share on some Windows box that's like an iSCSI mount to an inexpensive RAID array or something. This is basically what happened to Ashley Madison, and it's basically what happened to Sony. Attackers got in, probably through phishing, and then they found this giant file share where they were like, oh, 4 terabyte, Control A, right click, add to archive, done. That's it, and they've exported. And that's desktop backups, people's password files, pictures of their dogs, everything. 4 terabytes of just random crap from a company, and I guarantee you there's enough to hang everybody in that company based on that data. The trouble is that once you get to that stage, we have like 8 terabytes of data and it's mismanaged and everybody has access to it and there's no permissions of any kind on top of it, it becomes a ridiculous pain in the ass to go back and granularly decide who gets access to what. So one way I've seen to do it, which is still a giant pain, is you create the folder structure that you want to have and then you start dragging and dropping stuff, but that's days and days and days of like 2 or 3 dudes from help desk or analysts or whatever dragging and dropping shit on a SAN. Just that's it for like full time. It's stupid, yeah, but you know, it's one of those things where if you're in a fledgling startup, you're in a small company, or you're migrating SANs or NASs or what have you, something to think about, right? So TLDR, lesson number 5, wrap your file shares with granular permissions. I know it's a giant pain in the ass, but just look what happened to Sony, and that should hopefully, Sony and Ashley Madison at this point, and probably OPM I would wager, though I know nothing about the inside of their environment. It's going to make it harder for the bad guys to exfiltrate data. If you turn on audit logging in Windows, you will be able to see people trying to access stuff in a shady manner. Especially if it's like everyone's at a company retreat and suddenly one laptop starts going nuts trying to exfiltrate 4 terabytes of data. It's a pretty big fucking sign to know somebody's doing something shady. But you know, tell the executives, look what happened to Sony, we don't want to be them, or look what happened to Ashley Madison, we don't want to be them. Hopefully enough to sort of warrant people justifying the time. So this is a pretty big one. I've seen this in several places. Organizations that keep networking equipment at either 90% CPU saturation, or 90% CPU run rate, or 90% TCP session saturation. Like, in both cases, I've had to deal with this and it's made me lose hair. It's always been Juniper SRXs. I don't know what the deal is. Like, are the people that admin Junipers just incompetent, or are Junipers just shit? Like, I don't know. I stopped being sysadmin network admin in like 2008, so I'm not sure. But in both cases, it's bit me. It's exactly the same hardware. So in this case specifically, we're talking about usually a piece of hardware that is used to bind 2 networks together via a site-to-site VPN. So for example, you have an office and there's a Juniper SRX model, whatever, and it's allowing you to have site-to-site VPN, probably over IPsec, over MPLS, whatever, access to a data center. And there's another SRX on the far side in the data center that's terminating that connection. And the trouble is that the way that these things tend to operate is instead of just throwing UDP traffic down the wire as IPsec traffic, it tries to actually create TCP sessions for every connection that goes across that link, which is retarded, I think. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's going to be a network admin that like literally punches me when I get off stage, which is cool. No brain, no pain. It's all good. But if I can tip over your $250,000 Juniper SRX because I ran Nmap over a link, like there's a problem, and the problem is not Nmap. So in a lot of cases, what'll happen when I'm not sure, the logic was designed, it sounds like it was done drunk at 3 a.m. on the back of a bar napkin. When you hit 100% TCP sessions on one of these devices, it doesn't just start, I mean, it starts dropping TCP sessions to try and maintain that limit, but the trouble is that the sessions are all over the board. It's not like it'll just drop, oh, just from this host for this one session. Like it doesn't know that, oh, this is just the new SSH session, or this is an Nmap scan coming through, or this is anything like that. It just starts dropping shit. So as soon as that happens, the link effectively goes down because that packet dropping mechanism drops fucking packets from everybody. So suddenly all your SSH sessions die, your VoIP calls die, your SMB mounts die, like the fucking network goes down. So whoever designed this like fail-safe method to keep the network happy or whatever when you hit that session limit, or I don't know, maybe I'm talking completely out of my ass, but TLDR, the network goes down. So you run one Nmap on the local LAN and everything's fine. You run an Nmap across the link and the fucking whole office goes down and everybody's screaming in the building, lights on fire and the zombies come to life and shit, right? Whose fault is it? And there's probably people that have felt the wrath of this in the past where, you run a scan and they come running to you saying, what the fuck are you doing? You're taking our network down. Oh, but they don't mention that the people that are running the network while you're scanning are eating glue at the same time. Like, what the fuck are you thinking? Like, oh yeah, 90% TCP session rate. That's fucking rad. Totally cool. Like, we can run this all day. No, get the fuck out. You're fired. No, you're done. You can't work on networking gear anymore. It's like a dude that drives on the sidewalk and just runs over people. Well, he didn't kill everybody. He only killed the people on the right side of the road, not the left. It's fine, right? So this is a really sensitive topic because and I'll get to it later, there's another slide just for this, because you'll get in a political fight. The security department and the networking department will get in a political fight about who's in the wrong and who's in the right, and who can do what, and why this is good or why this is bad. And this sort of stuff is why at certain organizations that I've worked for in the past, it's basically like you cannot Nmap because it's penalty of death. If they catch you running Nmap, you just get fired. Which is really, really amusing, because like if you're in the SOC or if you're in the security department, you're an information security analyst, and they tell you that you can't enumerate your own attack surface, you're like, all right, that's cool. I'm supposed to protect a building from attackers, but I'm supposed to be blindfolded, and I'm supposed to sit in the data closet with my hands zip tied, and I'm supposed to guard the building from attackers, but I'm locked in a closet with my hands tied with a blindfold. Great, good job, thanks. That's really gonna fucking help. Like, that's compliance, basically. That's the way compliance works. So, TLDR, lesson number 6, if your firewall can't deal with a typical Nmap scan, get a new firewall. If your network engineers believe that this is in any way a defensible position, get new network engineers. So this is to that point, this is like, you know, with our powers combined, ultra fuckery. An organization deliberately running its equipment at 90% CPU or 90% TCP saturation rate expressly for the purposes of being able to tell auditors and security people, oh, you can't scan that because it's too fragile. And this is usually a compliance thing, because like something on the other end of that link is going to get somebody in trouble with like FINRA or FISMA or NERC-CIP or any other large compliance mechanism that basically says people are going to get strapped to a rocket and shot into the fucking sun if they get caught. And they don't want to get caught. So they won't let you scan that side of the link. They'll say, oh, you're not allowed. You can't scan that side of the link. It's like, well, my job is to make sure that shit over there is secure. And if I can't see over there, I can't really tell if things are secure, can I? And they're like, well, we don't care. That's your problem. Okay, the building's on fire. Have fun. So if you've experienced this in your particular organization, then you're kind of in dire circumstances, because as a security professional, you're literally at the mercy of a group of people who have positioned themselves between you and your success at your job. In every case that I've seen like this so far, the people in charge of the networking equipment tend to be very underqualified and have no place touching networking equipment to begin with. And it's a precarious place to be, because to be successful in this sort of environment, you literally have to social engineer your way into allowing them to let you do the scans, or somehow replace the underpowered equipment if it's actually underpowered equipment. So at this point, you're like the political thing that I mentioned before. You're basically up against people that are like career politicians. They will fiercely defend themselves because their goal is to hide the fact that they don't know what they're doing, and your security scanning will illuminate that fact. So they fight tooth and nail to keep you from doing your job, because it'll prove that they're not doing theirs. So lesson number 7, don't let the dirt metastasize. If that cancer grows too deep, it's nearly impossible to get it out. Don't let underqualified people dictate how security works in your organization, which again, tall order, I know, but it has to be said. Cross-contamination is a fun one. So network segmentation is a really important. Putting a second subnet on a switch doesn't fix anything. Like, it doesn't keep people from getting somewhere. If you just TCP dump and you can see all the ARP traffic for a different subnet, you just change your IP. So historically, networks have been created with like a hard outside perimeter and like a squishy nougat center, right? This was the way of the 90s, and if an attacker gained access to your LAN, then the attacker had basically free reign on anything inside of your LAN. So it was presumed generally, and it still is to a high degree at this point, that if something is on the LAN for some reason, it's got an IP address in the office, somehow it's safe because it's on the LAN. Like, how could bad guy shit end up on the LAN? Well, find me afterwards, I'll tell you some ways. So sadly, a lot of networks exist just like this today still. On almost every assessment that I've conducted, there has been some kind of poor network segmentation. One in particular that comes to mind, there was one company who had all the networking engineers, all their sysadmins and all the network people sat on one particular floor. And the policy was that to get to the data center, you had to either VPN in, it was like a site-to-site VPN, or you had to like go into a lab, or you had to use a jump box. Well, they were too lazy for that. They didn't want to go through extra steps to touch the equipment that they worked on every day. So they just quietly added themselves into a VLAN on the switch fabric that allowed that floor to have direct access to the production equipment, which was really cool because when I got shells on that floor, I also had access to all the production equipment. And this was an organization that did like financial trading and things like that. So suddenly, FINRA and FISMA and all those compliance stuff comes to mind. We're like, why all of a sudden did these guys have access to the production equipment? And that's how I got into the data center and started moving laterally in there. So effectively, TLDR, don't trust hosts on your LAN just because they're on your LAN. Like, if I'm on your LAN, you shouldn't trust me. Like, especially if I'm not supposed to be there. Which is actually, yeah, just don't trust me on your LAN, ever, for any reason. So, another one on passwords. Everybody's going to groan and roll their eyes, right? But password reuse is a really common topic. This is a bit different. It's not just don't use the same passwords everywhere, and it's not use complex passwords, because, you know, in many of my assessments, it's sort of like a 70-30 blend. You have like 30% of the people using like ridiculously strong, like one password generated passwords, 30 characters, it's like a whole sentence, and like, that's awesome, 30 character password. Probably sucks to type it in all the time, but like nobody's gonna brute force that, there's no way. The trouble is that if I can get a shell on those machines, or any machine that you've logged into, and I can run Mimikatz, Windows stores those credentials in clear text in memory. So if I can Mimikatz your workstation, and I can get your Active Directory credentials from there, and the credentials are the same somewhere else, at that point, it's not even a password complexity issue. It's entirely a reuse issue, because if you have a production domain and a QA domain and your corporate domain, and you have the same exact credentials in every single one of those domains, it's trivial for me to just jump across the LAN laterally using your credentials that I've stolen. Because all I got to do is fish one person in the organization, usually, and that's the end of it, if I can get in. So it's almost assumed at this point that like somebody's going to crack under phishing. Somebody will run the thing. Somebody will get owned. Which, that, you know, the IR of that is a whole different topic. And I have had customers basically oust me completely in the course of an hour. But that's a really embarrassing talk that I'm not going to give on stage. Find me afterwards and ply me with alcohol, and I'll tell you that one. But yeah, so TLDR, don't use the same credentials in Active Directory as you do for like your Cisco gear or other domains. If you get compromised, pretty much assume all, like if you find me on a box and you find Mimikatz has been run on that box, assume that box is completely compromised and all the information on that box is now mine. So if you know that password that I stole from you works somewhere else, like change it now, because I will eventually find it and I will use that password to move laterally. Yeah, TLDR, make sure you're not using the same passwords everywhere. If you do, you're probably gonna have a good time. Or you're not gonna have a good time. You'll have a very bad time. I'll make sure of it. So, I was a sysadmin in a former life. Are there any sysadmins in the room? Some. Did anybody play the Uptime game where you're like, fuck yeah, like 3,000 days of uptime, yeah, that's awesome, because now I know how old your kernel is, and now I know all the privilege escalation vulnerabilities, and now I know all the stuff that you've run that needs a reboot that's super old, and if I count back 3,000 days, all I gotta do is go and find all the vulns that exist for that kernel for 3,000 days, and now I have this cornucopia of hacks that I can use to own your box. So, fun times with Uptime. So in this particular case, there's a fun story that I know about an organization that had, it was an array of Foundry switches, if I recall correctly, and this particular version of Foundry firmware they were running had a memory leak problem where if you SSH'd into the thing enough times, every time you SSH'd in, it wasn't like freeing the RAM when it was done. So at some point, you would run out of RAM on the switch and the switch would tip over. And by tip over, I just mean it would just hang, and you'd have to go physically pull the power out of the thing and reboot it to make it come back to life. So abject unwillingness to reboot their equipment, even for the sake of patching critical stuff. They would rather have the uptime. In this case, these guys had a script, and this is normal. I do this stuff too, and I know a lot of other shops that do this. They had a script that would run over SSH, and it would go and SSH into the switches and pull the configs off for the purposes of backup. So that's totally cool. So at some point they rebooted all the switches, and then they started running this script, and it would SSH in and pull the backup script off, or they pull the backup or the config off. So at some point, because all these switches, like I think there were 14 or something like that of them, one by one, as the script would log into the switch, it would do just enough to tip the switch over. And then it would log into the next switch and do just enough to tip the switch over. So one day, we start getting panic phone calls at 5 in the morning because the core switching fabric in the data center of this organization is completely down. And the client is going berserk, and there's like fireworks shooting out of their ears. And they're trying to figure out, was this a targeted attack? So I had to sit down for a moment and think, if an attacker knows enough about your network to take your network down that specifically, you have way bigger problems than your network is down. Like, they have been watching you for long enough to understand where you're vulnerable and know exactly how to hit you. They will know your response time. I mean, this is Hollywood level shit. Like, this is the sort of stuff you see in the movie. Like, there's no way that a targeted attacker did this unless their specific intention was to play in the stock market, a la the horrific movie Black Hat. Right, because the whole TLDR, the whole movie was like, oh, we did all this crazy shit, but it was really just to like bump stock prices on some company or something. Wow, okay. Yeah, the most interesting part of the movie was one gunplay scene where they're like, oh, cool, they got guns right, but that's about all they got right. So in this case, stability is more important than uptime, right? So reboot your gear to patch it, especially if you're talking about like networking appliances. Like this should be fairly common knowledge, like apply patches, right? This is one of the reasons people say apply patches. In this case, this was a trading organization, and I think it cost them somewhere between $8 and $12 million or something. I don't have the final numbers, but yeah, they lost millions of dollars because they were down for a day. Because 2 or 3 of the guys that helped, that were in the networking department refused to reboot switches for the sake of updating firmware. So like TLDR, just please patch your stuff. Yeah, lesson 10, patch your shit. So this is a really fun one for me. A lot of organizations find that they spend hundreds and hundreds of man hours meticulously grooming Office documents, usually for compliance or audit reasons, which is the case in large organizations, anybody that's publicly owned and stuff like that. But then they don't actually do anything in the doc. They have a doc that says we have a next generation firewall, we have these policies, we do this and we do that, and blah, 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 blah. And then like Deloitte or whoever comes in, or KPMG, and they walk in and they're like, all right, guys, show me your firewall. And the dude goes, all right, there it is. It's on the floor under the desk. And they go, check. There you go. We're compliant. From what I can tell, in a lot of cases, the auditors don't seem to be looking past the actual documentation. In a lot of cases, what these organizations will give the auditors a binder like 4 inches thick and say, here you go, here's all our stuff. And the auditor will just go, oh, just no, whatever, and they just walk away. So you actually have to do security for that sort of stuff to work. Like nothing that ever has been done in Microsoft Word or Microsoft Excel has ever actually fixed security. Like that's cool, you made a spreadsheet and it's got some pivot tables. Yeah, but like, let's put on our Ashley Madison hat. And they're like, oh yeah, we are compliant, but they're exfiltrating like a terabyte of data and now it's on Pastebin. Good job, how did your compliance help you there? It didn't at all in any shape, way, or form. Compliance is just a way to avoid fines. It has nothing to do with security. It's literally just to avoid fines. So if you find yourself sitting in a meeting room where people are giving more focus to compliance documentation than actually conducting security, you should make it a point to say, like, this isn't going to make us safer in any way. Like, or in some cases, if you're ballsy enough, just hack some shit in the office and be like, cool, how would compliance have fixed this? Or like, how would compliance, do a tabletop exercise. How would compliance have fixed Sony? How would compliance have fixed Home Depot? Like, you can use all these ridiculous major breaches as that argument point. Like, tell me how, right? So TLDR, lesson 11, you actually have to do stuff for security to work. And that stuff tends to live very far outside of Microsoft Office documents. So from time to time, and this is probably a topic warm to many of your hearts, security researchers will find something that they decide is significant, and they will try to report it to a company. The good guy types will often try to contact the manufacturer of hardware or software and notify them that there's a critical vulnerability. Sometimes the vendor listens, and sometimes they don't. This is an example of when they don't. There's a sign manufacturer, Yesco, that makes signs, and they're kind of a small to medium-sized one. They make giant LED billboards that go over freeways. The configuration is basically something like a consumer endpoint device, like a Cradle Point or DSL modem or something like that, as the gateway, an XP box for some reason, an Axis camera, and some holes poked in the firewall so that VNC can be routed to the desktop, and HTTP on some other port 8088 or something like that can go to the camera. So they ship with very, very bad default credentials, which I'll tell you off camera, but they're bad. In fact, because you know the company name, you probably know the credential. It's face-slappingly bad. And there's several hundred of these things all over the country. So one day I found them all on Shodan. And as a test, I used a command line program called VNC Snapshot to go and take a screenshot of all of them. And actually, might have a demo. Well, I need to get on the internet, but I can show you guys a demo at the end if I have 5 minutes. But there's still a lot of these things that are just public. So I try to contact Yesco, and I'm like, hey guys, like you have customers that are horrifically vulnerable, and you can do some really, really evil things with control of several hundred LED billboards that are publicly accessible on the internet and facing millions and millions of people that like drive by on the freeway and stuff. And you think to yourself like, oh, fucking Vis, what are you doing? Like, it's just a billboard, who cares? Really? I can geolocate each one of those IP addresses with a variety of different tools, and then I can say for that specific zip code, Ebola alert with a big fucking flashing sign, right? Right? I could do that, or I could say like, the next 25 callers that call this phone number get a free iPad and put like your phone number, and then suddenly your phone is denial of service. Or yeah, just spinning dickbot on all of them, right? Why not? Because that GIF is amazing. I was gonna make a flip book out of it. So, or you can do like kind of dark, kind of creepy. Make them all the ISIS flag, and then just duck because suddenly martial law will happen and like helicopters everywhere and holy fuck, right? How many people in like Texas would shit their pants if every LED billboard in that state went like ISIS flag, right? It would eat itself. The state would cave in. So like you think, oh, LED billboards, but no, if you're clever enough, you can fuck some shit up with an LED billboard. So I told this to Yesco, and they were like, and I went, okay, and I made this talk. Right? So like, don't be these guys. Oh, and I should say, so this guy in the slide, I like pointing this out. This guy, Brian, he really tried, but he has nothing to do with the actual signs. So they have like a business division, and then they have the people that manufacture and ship the signs. So this dude is like business guy, works on their office computers. He's like a help desk dude. So when I tried to contact these guys, there was no security contact of any kind. I tried contacting them on LinkedIn, and then I tried contacting them on Facebook, and they ignored me on LinkedIn and on Facebook. One of their social media person forwarded my note to the help desk guy, and the help desk guy was like, "How can I help you?" And I wrote him a book. It's like a page-and-a-half email saying like, fuck for like a page. And he wrote back basically like white face, I shat my pants, I will forward this to the appropriate people. And then a month later, I poked him again. I'm like, hey, it's been a month. Has anything happened? Any news? And he's like, thanks go away. I think this was it. This was the mail I got back. So not interested, but thanks for the follow-up. And then like a day later, that sign in Georgia gets goatseed, and everybody's looking at me. And I'm like, I didn't fucking do it. Stop it. The timing was very amusing, but it got goatseed before this, like 2 or 3 days before this conversation happened. And his after the several talks came out, he saw my presentations and was like, I should probably explain the reason that I was so short and curt with you in the email was because I was dealing with goatseed. And I'm like, fair enough. So TLDR, lesson number 12, when a security researcher contacts you and tells you about a problem, it means that not only does that person know about it, many other people also know about it and aren't saying anything. It's probably a good idea to take these folks seriously and listen to at least listen to what they have to say. Don't threaten them with lawyers or anything like that, because what they're telling you is that you have your pants down and they should probably see about pulling them back up. And this is without even like talking about bug bounties or having a security program or anything like that. Just take them seriously, because if somebody comes to you and says, hey, I found a thing, and if they say, hey, I found a thing and here's some legit info, take them seriously. If they say, hey, you have like your head options turned on in Apache and I want $1,000, just don't even ever fuck those guys. There was a gig that I did for a company that had a SOC, and it was a moderately developed program, and the SOC had a SIM, a very expensive one, and then we had a lot of procedures in place, and my role there was to help them build the SOC and conduct themselves in a fortuitous manner for all of them, right? The intention was to help them grow the SOC and build the practices and things like that. But there was one dude who worked in the SOC, and for the life of me, I cannot sort out why he would do this other than just being lazy. Well, I should ask first, does anybody work on a SIM or in a SIM and have to deal with like thousands and thousands of alerts, like bullshit logs from Active Directory or brute forces? Right? There's a couple people in the crowd. So like, imagine if you had somebody sat next to you in the SOC that would like highlight 10,000 alerts at a time and then just delete them. Right? Like the tool you're using to identify if people are attacking you, like some asshat is deleting all the evidence that you would use to find and act on bad shit, and in addition to that, that's evidence that you would use subsequently in court to prosecute somebody if they got caught. And somebody's just like, Control-A, delete. What? I have no idea. Oh, no, it's too, this was like 2009 or something, it was years ago. But no, but here's the thing, like at that point, like, how do you know that this guy isn't working with the bad guys? How do you know that somebody just didn't give them, like, here's 4,000 Bitcoins. We just want you to delete everything in the SOC. And when they find out and they fire you, that's cool because you have like several $100,000 in your bank account now. Like, how do you know that's not the case? I know that's kind of foil hatty. It's a little conspiracy theoristy, but like you don't want to be the head of security or the CISO or the security director sat in the hot seat when that topic of discussion comes up at a board meeting. Like imagine this being like Sony or Ashley Madison. You're sat at this big conference table and like the dudes in the suits on the other end of the table are like, where's all the data we're going to use to prosecute these guys? And you have to go, no, my shithead SOC analyst fucking deleted it all. Sorry, bro. Like, really? They're not going to fucking just dice you up into pieces and feed you to the staff on the spot? Like, and this was okay at the time. So like, lesson number 13, make sure that your security staff knows that there are consequences to helping the attackers. In situations like this, it's a good idea to make examples out of them. It's mean, sure, but if you're the director or the CISO and you have to go to a board meeting, you don't want to have to explain why one of your staff was actively deleting evidence that would normally be used to find bad guys that have committed felonies. So now we'll switch over to effectively my side of the house. Pentester fails. It's easy to talk smack about clients and large public security fails, from the big armchair that is our like trolley conference room here. But make no mistake, pen testers fuck shit up too. They make mistakes. There's quite a lot of derp. I should play you the song of my people. So, as it turns out, using mass scan on a client probably isn't a good idea if you haven't wrenched all the way up. Firewalls that have deep packet inspection turned on, or next generation firewalls that have a bunch of bells and whistles turned on, apparently the manufacturers never take into account that the firewall is going to get scanned from time to time, and not always by the good guys. So it's funny for the folks in the room that remember when SYN cookies started making it into the Linux kernel. Like the whole purpose of SYN cookies was to fix SYN flooding. And at some point, a bunch of next generation firewall vendors said, no, this is fucking stupid. We're going to tear it out. Like, for example, this is a fun one, checkpoint firewalls. They have a thing that they consider a security measure which says, if somebody nmaps this firewall on the outside, we're just going to respond that every port is open. Like, that's the opposite of SYN cookies, right? That's literally like, no, SYN cookies were invented to prevent resource exhaustion. So checkpoint went like, no, that's stupid. We want resource exhaustion. Wait. Also, as a fun aside, you can use mass scan as a load testing device to see how much damage you can do if you have a lab set up and you're doing scanning across a network link where you have like one of these next generation firewalls set up as a transparent firewall. Deep packet inspection on 500,000 packets a second will wrench everything up to 100%, and in some cases things will break and not come back. So fun. You probably want to do that to your $300,000 firewall to see like what happens when somebody actually tries to do something bad to it before spending the money. Just a thought. It's probably a good idea to understand that like bad shit will happen from time to time, and you can't just presume that the bells and whistles on your firewall are going to do you right no matter what. Test them. Like build a lab, try and break it, fuck shit up, see what happens, and then select whatever firewall you like the most that does all the stuff. So lesson number 14, presume that your clients have guys on their team that are going to run their gear at 90% CPU and 90% TCP session rate all the fucking time. Like presume that nmap-t4 will take down infrastructure, and also realize that some genius firewall manufacturers will create sessions for UDP traffic for some bizarre reason. So doing UDP scans across network links is also another surefire way to end up having a bad time. So as a paid attacker, you have to take into account that, just like the last slide, not everybody's going to do the right thing all the time, which is probably one of the reasons that they hired you in the first place. Log servers, SIMs, database servers, things like that, almost in every case, simply pointing a web app scanner at a site and hitting go and walking away is a really bad idea, especially if that's the extent of the work that you do. What's happening on the back end is that every 404, every 500, every 200 is getting written to a log somewhere, and if you overflow that, or if you flood that server with logs, then eventually like /var is going to fill up. And for the MySQL people in the room, like what happens when /var fills up, right? And then what happens when MySQL dies? Then what happens when the thing goes like, oh, the Linux server panics and the kernel says, fuck you, we're going read-only mode, and the whole file system turns read-only. Like things break very fast. So, and this can happen as a cascade event from just pointing a web app scanner at stuff. So take into account that just blindly pointing tools at applications and services may break things, and not in the way that you think. Like for example, if your web app has a hidden menu that's linked somewhere in a comment or something like that, that has buttons or forms that allow you to drop databases or drop tables or things like that, at some point like Burp or whatever you're using is going to find them, and by definition these things just fill out every form and press every button. So if you have a button that says fucking destroy my entire world and get me fired, it's going to press the button. So like, be aware of that. So lesson number 15, don't throw the kitchen sink at your client unless they know that they can take it. Make sure to ask questions during the scoping call, if there is a scoping call, on how their logging is configured and how their applications are configured so that you can sort of tiptoe around things that you know are going to be landmines in the future. So on a very rare occasion, and I understand this is not how things are supposed to be run, but nobody here would have a job if everybody did what they were supposed to do. Externally facing services that are talking to Active Directory that authenticate for some reason, if you brute force them, you run the risk of locking out user accounts, and that's going to cause work stoppages. Like suddenly somebody can't access a file share because their account is locked, or they get logged out of Outlook or what have you, or Exchange I should say. It's pretty rare to find a shop that actually has that kind of setup for simple things like office equipment, but they are absolutely out there, like web apps and things like that that use like NTLM over HTTPS or what have you. That sort of stuff will break things on the back end if the people on the Active Directory side aren't taking into consideration that these login requests are coming from a web server. So brute forcing is it's getting kind of old and antiquated at this point when we're getting things like Sony, things like Ashley Madison, like those was no brute forcing there at all. It was all phishing. So at this point, brute force, you really don't need it much anymore. I mean, maybe you're brute forcing passwords, maybe they're not always Active Directory, but there's a lot. Brute forcing TLDR should basically be one of your last resorts. So lesson number 15, try and hit these guys where they're soft and not where they're expecting you. Brute forcing should basically be a last ditch effort anyway. I mean, you should be able to get in Mimikatz, do that sort of thing, presuming a Windows network. So occasionally, when you're doing things like running a phishing campaign, small mistakes are made. Perhaps you're using a system with multiple identities. Perhaps the drop-down window that you have selected for the phishing campaign that you're about to run, directly above or below the company you're targeting actually has an old client, or maybe your personal email or something like that. Maybe one client accidentally phishes another client, or maybe you send a phish from your personal email instead by mistake. These things tend to happen. The fun part about that sort of thing is, generally speaking, most people will take phishing emails and just throw them in the trash and perform no investigation whatsoever. I mean, it doesn't scale. It's at some point, if you're actually getting hit with phishing, unless it's targeted. If it's targeted, yeah, you should probably consider doing a lot of IR. But like random phishes that come in tend to be treated like spam. They just get marked as bad and thrown in the trash. The fun part is, yeah, most people don't do any follow-up. So it's not a big deal unless you sort of unless you lose access that you were intending to get from that campaign, or you lose access that other people have, or somehow you get outed or things like that. So lesson number 16, details matter when you're trying to pretend to be somebody else. So like Zaz said, don't fuck it up. Let's see. So lockpicking only works if the lock works when you're done. Fun times with physical assessments. It's probably a good idea to gauge what your skill is before you start attacking a lock, especially if the lock is considered fragile, like a laptop lock or keyboard lock or something like that. If you use the wrong tool on like a Kensington laptop lock, you will destroy the lock, because they're very flimsy and fragile. And if you destroy the lock, you have effectively permanently tethered this laptop to its desk. And that's going to be really upsetting for the people who have a company mandate to take their laptop home with them every day at the end of the day. So suddenly their laptop is literally fucking chained to the desk, and they're going to be pretty upset about it. Lesson 17, do not accidentally turn a lock into an insurmountable obstacle. Make sure you don't overdo it with the physical stuff. So actually, I think we already went over this briefly. A lot of web applications have admin functionality. A lot of web applications have like hidden stuff or QA stuff on the back end that says manipulate this database, drop tables, create files, upload stuff like that, blah. If you're using a web app scanner, as I said before, it will connect to the web. It'll connect to the web app and it'll press every button and fill out every form. So you're going to get a whole bunch of emails, or you're going to get a flood of emails from. It used to be Peter Wiener in Burp, but now it's Peter Winter, because I guess people complained. Surprise, right? You wake up one morning at 4 a.m, and you have 47,000 emails from Peter Wiener, because Peter Wiener really wants whatever marketing shtick you have on your site you're having assessed. Or the entire site's down because the database got dropped. So yeah, TLDR, lesson number 18, don't nuke your customer's web app because you were lazy about configuring your scanning tool. Ask these questions during the scoping call, and these mistakes could cost you the gig, and they will definitely cost you repeat business, and that has a bottom line that your executives will not be happy about. So when communicating risk to stakeholders, it's very important to use plain English, and when telling people that are responsible for things that they have a problem that could ruin their day, or you have found a problem that could ruin their day, it's very important to be selective about the language you use. I was told a story once by somebody that involved the finding a vulnerability in a school-based system. I think it was like a Blackboard system, and realization that this guy could turn this into a gig. So what he did was he went to the school and said, hey, I found this vuln in your Blackboard system. I have access to like all your teacher and student data, but I'm not going to fix it unless you pay me. So the school went like, this is blackmail, and called the cops. So he could have phrased it differently and he wouldn't have had to deal with law enforcement. But it's an important thing to consider that, you know, you have to make sure that you phrase things correctly. Words do have meanings, and you should speak slowly and make sure you say exactly what you mean, and take into consideration people will very often, sometimes, and especially from a legal perspective, forcibly take things the wrong way on purpose because they will try and exploit the fact that you didn't say it the way that you were supposed to say it. So lesson 19, words have meanings. They really do, no matter how much you flaunt your disregard for the English language, the rest of us actually use it. Be precise with your words or you're going to have a bad time. So the fun part about doing attack simulation is the part where you get a letter absolving you of doing any crimes and giving you permission to attack a company as a real adversary would. So in these types of scenarios, having a physical letter to carry around on you is a really good idea. It helps you from actually going to jail. In smaller engagements like external network pen tests or web app pen tests, the customer will typically ask you for like a source IP address so that they can whitelist it so you can continue doing stuff without them getting like 47,000 emails at 3 in the morning. So basically this is sort of a stay in scope bullet point. I heard another story about, amusingly, the same guy who decided that his web app pen test was not going the way that he would like, and he felt like he wasn't going to be applauded for his efforts. So what he decided to do in his infinite wisdom was conduct a social engineering campaign against this customer for like extra credit or something. He basically said, oh, I'm just going to give them some extra stuff. And the way that I sort of computed that in my brain is like, that's like the person cutting your hair, cutting off extra hair and saying like, oh, this is great, I'm doing extra work, this is going to be rad for me. It's like, I wanted a haircut, but the dude shaved my head, so like obviously this was good, right? He just wanted to go above and beyond. Like, no, that's not how shit works. So in this case, the client noticed that they were being attacked, and at first they started getting involved with law enforcement. They may have gotten the FBI on the phone, and then they started doing incident response, and they realized it was the same guy. So they contacted the Pentesting company, and they were like, why is your guy doing a social? Like, we didn't pay you for a social. What the fuck is going on? Like, we thought we were actually under attack by a legit attacker. So the executive said, hold on 1 second, and they just finished tying the guy to the rocket and then set him off on his way to the sun. So TLDR, like, scope is very important on engagements where scope is a thing, especially when only very few people know that you're coming, because you can trigger a legitimate incident response from the company. And as I mentioned, anything extra in this case is like your stylist giving you free extra work during a haircut. It's just going to leave you really pissed off. Okay. So this is a long topic, but I'll just skip to the end. TLDR, if attorneys are involved and you're passing documentation to a remote attorney, make sure that when it comes back, it's exactly the same as you sent it. In some cases, attorneys will change language in contracts to try and work things out into their favor, especially to protect those asshats that are running all their shit at 90% CPU and 90% TCP saturation rate, so that when you do your initial scan and their office goes down, they'll try and blame you, and if the language in the contract doesn't line up correctly, it'll cost you the gig, or maybe you can get sued. So it's beware of changes in legal documentation and contracts by customers who have attorneys that like inserting themselves into places so that they can bill extra hours. So now that we have 20 landmines pointed out, let's talk about what happens when you step on one. So if your organization has a huge fail and it's not in the news yet, you're going to want to try and find ways to keep it quiet. If customer data was leaked, you're basically obligated to talk about the breach, but if there's no customer data leaked, I don't think you're legally obligated to actually disclose. So this is one of these sort of make sure that you're telling people the things that you need to be telling them. Set expectations, create blog posts that talk about what you're doing proactively. Don't wait for the press or people to come to you and ask you what you're doing. If you're proactive about stuff, then people won't ask a lot of questions. So a great TLDR here is to say basically Ashley Madison, how not to do press. The short version is that they lied to the press. They said, no, this wasn't our data. It's all bullshit. It's all fake. Somebody did this hack for PR reasons. And then a bunch of security researchers said, yeah, but the fake email account that I created specifically for this service that doesn't exist anywhere else was in the leaked data. So how do you explain that? And then they said, oh no, okay, some data got leaked, but the vast majority of it is all fake. And then even more data came out and they found out that no, it's not actually all fake. It's all legit. So these guys got dragged through the mud, and they look really ugly. They look really stupid. A lot of people made a lot of really big mistakes. So TLDR, don't lie to the press. If you lie to the press and then you get ousted, you're just going to look a lot worse. It's even better to just ignore the press completely and say nothing. Attitude counts for a lot. You don't want to be snarky or defensive when talking to the press. I don't remember who it was, but one of the recent big breaches came with some of the executive staff griping to the press and having an attitude. And if you look like a dick on camera about you getting owned, people are gonna like you a lot less, and it's gonna invite other people to come mess with you more. So yeah, especially if you say that the data is fake, or you say that you're secure now, then you're inviting actual attackers to come and say, oh, well, they thought they were secure before and they're not secure now, so you're inviting more bad news. So timing counts for quite a lot. As I just mentioned, you want to issue periodic updates if you've experienced a breach, and you want to make sure that if the customer data is touched, then people know about it. It's pointless to issue hollow or empty or bland corporate statements because they mean nothing. If you want to avert the press digging into something that you said vaguely to try and hide the truth, then you want to make sure you give the public what is reasonable to believe that they want before they actually ask for it. If you give them a reason to think, wow, they're on top of this, then you'll come out on top and they won't chase you. So have a plan for when something breaks. This is basically a short version of have some kind of incident response plan. It doesn't even have to be formal. You can just cycle it around with some folks in a tribal manner. It doesn't have to be a formal policy. Just what to do when some shit breaks, and consider the big hacks that have happened previously. Like what happens when we discover somebody on our networks? What happens when you discover our stuff on Pastebin? What happens when we find a torrent file on Pirate Bay with like all of our stuff in it? Like consider those options and just you don't even have to do a tabletop exercise, just like a couple of bullet points on what you should do first, and maybe have some contact information. Lay the seeds for incident response, because if you don't have an incident response plan, then you're gonna have a very bad time, especially when the press comes around. So during a breach, nerves will be frayed, people will be stressed, there'll be a lot of shouting, lots of panic. People will interrupt you with lots of questions and demands for status updates, and during this you'll likely be pressured and have a very high level of anxiety. So it helps to have some sources to look things up. So there's one that I had in here. It was like AlienVault stuff and the Critical Stack stuff are really good. Having a copy of Security Onion on a VM somewhere is really handy. Use your imagination. There's a lot of resources out there, but basically this is the equivalent of having like a life vest around. Just keep some stuff around. It doesn't have to be super perfect. It doesn't have to be amazing. It doesn't have to be like the top tier shit, anything. Because if you don't have a security program, or you don't have any kind of incident response documentation lying around, or any kind of formal procedures, then you're gonna have to have something. And effectively, if you're working with computers, at some point you're gonna have to deal with this, so it's probably a good idea to have some, even like 1% is better than no percent, right? So do something. So I'm very short on time. I have like a minute and a half left. These are the lessons learned that I've put up if anybody wants to snap a picture or what have you. This is basically the TLDR for the entire talk. I will publish the slides. I think they also go to Toorcon as well, and I think Toorcon publishes the slides if I recall correctly. I will be around if you want to harangue me and ask me questions. Please do. I'm happy to tell war stories. I think I have a minute. If anybody has any questions, I can fill a minute. One, you in the back?
You're saying that kind of the impetus I get from this whole talk is that it's to convince the C-levels that security is actually an issue and to get them to make real changes. Like, so when you're coming to them with these examples that closely fit your organization, that often doesn't seem to be enough. So what else can you do on top of that to really drive the point home that, hey, we can be fucked really seriously if we don't fix this?
Get buy-in from one of the technology executives and do a red team exercise on your own infrastructure and target the executives. Straight up, fish the executives. Own the executives, show them pictures of themselves picking their noses and be like, is this serious now? I think that's all I have. Anybody else has questions, please come tackle me. Cool. Thank you.
All right, as you may have heard, we have some snacky treats out in the lobby, sponsored by Rapid7 Metasploit. So please go grab some coffee, water, snacky